What is the creepiest thing that's happened to you personally that made you question reality? My wife and I had a 2-hour drive back from Street Louis to our home, during which both of us lost time. Woke up 3 hours later, still an hour and a half away from home, only having used enough gas to go that half hour, and our GPS showed we had been driving our normal route. We still have no ducking idea what happened, but we know we hadn't pulled over and that neither of us had any memory between taking an exit and seeing this ONW particular billboard for a restaurant we always pass. Still freaks me the duck out. Ducking auditory hallucinations. Duck nose. Was driving down a rural really dark road at night. I'm super sleep deprived. Drunk several of those 240mg caffeine Monster Energy drinks. I didn't have the radio on, so it was pretty quiet. Then the whispering started. I'm confused, don't understand what it is. Try to focus on it. Is my stereo not all the way off? Then it started mumbling louder. Duck, this ain't good. Then I hear a very clear turn here. But my GPS says continue for 12 miles. Hahaha, duck that. Nope, duck that. I turn radio on really loud and continue home. Next physical I mention it to Doc. Am I insane? Both sleep deprivation and caffeine have been known to induce auditory hallucinations individually. Combining both, it's perfectly normal to hear things. If it happens again, come back in. Thought I was going mental. Not necessarily creepy, but definitely made me question reality. I used to work in a gas station. One regular customer was like night and day. One day he'd be soft-spoken and shy. The next he'd be obnoxious. His cigarette preference also changed from day to day, but he always came in the same work truck with the same guys at the same time of day. One day, he walked in and went straight to the bathroom. A minute later, he walked in again and came to the counter. Twins. It took me 8 months to realize they were twins. And not even identical twins, either. They just looked really similar. I am a TA in our college's anatomy class, which takes place in the cadaver lab. Dead bodies. Late one night, I am working alone in the cadaver lab and I start to hear a noise. It's hard to tell what the noise sounds like, but it's a consistent muffled noise. So I kind of walk around the room and locate it. Now normally the bodies are all kept in these big metal crates, but at the time we had one more body than we did crate. So one body was in a plastic body bag and that's where the noise was coming from. So I am terrified at this point. All alone in the lab, looking down at this plastic body bag that I can see the outline of the body that presumably is coming back to life because it is definitely making noise. I stood over this body for a solid minute, debating whether I should open the bag. And finally the noise just stops. I got all my stuff together and bolted from the lab. A couple weeks later, the professor tells me to be careful if I ever work on that body because there is a live pacemaker in it, so don't cut into that. And it will vibrate and ring every few hours if it's low on battery. I let out the biggest sigh of relief that we weren't haunted. One morning I woke up to my alarm going off at 6:30 as usual and got up and cooked breakfast. As soon as I sat down to eat, my alarm went off again and I woke up in bed. I dreamed that I woke up and went about my morning routine. That was easily the most disorienting thing I've ever experienced. Once woke up to the sound of heavy breathing and felt as if I was being watched. I couldn't move for a while either. Then I just blurted out my dog's name and kept calling for him. He didn't run over, and as soon as I could get myself to move I went looking for him. Found him sitting in the kitchen doorway, just staring straight forward. I started calling him from right behind him and he wouldn't even turn around. Then I touched his back and he turned to glance at me, but went right back to his trance. A year or so after the fact, I found out that the first thing was probably sleep paralysis. Not too sure about what was going on with the dog though. My friend was about to clean his gun and it was pointed directly at me when it went off. For a few seconds we stood there in shock, him thinking he killed me and me in a state of pure panic. Afterwards we found the bullet embedded in a wall beside me. I will never let him live that it down. I had 2 bananas, connected at the stem part, broke them into 2, ate one, threw out the peel, came back for the other one and it's gone. I live alone. Either I have a rotting banana somewhere in my apt or I've gone crazy. Update. It's been weeks. Haven't smelled the other banana. I'll accept that I just went bananas for that moment. When I was a kid between 8 or 9, I used to wake up every night to headlights coming through my bedroom window. The lights would stop and turn off. Not as if a car drove by, but as if they were turned off. Then the long shadows of a man, as if were looking through my window, would pass by and stop in front of my window. I would lay really still and pretend nothing happened. Every night for months. Eventually I convinced myself it was imagination. Now that I think back, it stopped when my stepdad moved in. My mom was single, but I was convinced it wasn't real. Across the street lived my best friend whose mom was also single, and she refused to sleep in her bedroom. Her window faced my window. She told me years later it was because every night a man would park in her side yard and walk over to my yard. The long shadows were from the light in her yard. She eventually decided it was my dad checking on us and never told me until I was a teenager. It wasn't my dad. I asked him. So I thought I was crazy and hallucinating for years, and perhaps I wasn't, or two kids were having odd dreams at the same time every night. After my grandpa died, there was sightings of him throughout the neighborhood and everyone said he was smiling. D. Woke up to my granddad stood by the door staring at me. Scared the it out of me, and there was a flash and he was gone. He's been dead about 7 or 8 years at that point. I asked my mum, she said yeah, he often did that. He'd wake my nan up for work by knocking on the window. I was driving back home at night a couple of weeks ago and I passed a sign that stated a town was coming up. This town is 10 miles from my hometown. The sign said it was 10 miles, so I continued driving. I drive 10 miles. Don't see the exit. Look up and see the sign that said the town is 10 miles away. It was like I hadn't moved. I went past the same exit again too. No one believes me. PS. Didn't know my highest rated Reddit comment would come from this. IA posted this before, but thought it would fit here too. By my hometown there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara escarpment, so it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around on. I went with some friends when I was 19/20 and we were crawling around and found a cave that went pretty deep. We had never been in there before. Had never even seen it before. So we pushed forward and decided to check it out, even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave and it was easily 20-30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around with which light we had, we noticed it was really clean inside the cave. As in, it didn't have beer cans littered everywhere like all the other small caves did. While in there we got a really eerie feeling after being in there shortly. Hearing weird and strange things. Feeling like we were being touched, poked and pulled, and not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was too dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others. Although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes. Convinced to come back with flashlights, we came out to see that it was now dusk outside. When we entered it was midday. Somehow we had lost roughly 3 hours inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights the next week, but have never been able to find this cave again. 2 days after my grandmother died, the scent of her favorite perfume just filled the bathroom. At least 6 times in my life I've gone home. I know I locked the door, but when I'm about to put my key in, the door opens like someone was expecting me, but no one's there. It's happened at my mom's house, my house, and other PPLS houses. I was helping my buddy move into his new house, and when we came back with more stuff I had to pee, so I ran to the front door and it opened. When he came in he said he locked it before we left. Don't know what it is, but maybe it's a superpower. One night I was on Stephen Hawking's Wikipedia page and I thought to myself, damn, he looks a lot worse. What if he died tonight? Next morning I wake up to Stephen Hawking dead. See a dream and the next day it becomes reality, even little details like the clothes me and my brother wore. I had a terrible dream when I was 10 and I called my mom to come lay with me and we passed out, I guess. I woke up staring at the back of head. Her hair looked exactly like Michael Myers. I said mom, she turned around and it was her, but holy it, I'll never forget. Edit. Thanks for the gold. I worked at a small retail shop that sold mostly small accessories and clothes. I have never really believed in ghosts, but my co-workers always swore the place was haunted. Lights would flicker randomly and canvases would fall violently to the ground despite my efforts of propping them up so that they didn't. The thing that really made me question everything happened when I was closing alone at night. We had a sunglass display in the middle of the store. Just a flat glass shelf with a bunch of sunglasses laid out nicely on top. I walk past it to the register and hear this huge crash. Look back and all of the sunglasses were on the floor. It looked like somebody just took their arm and dragged it across the shelf, pushing them all off. There wasn't anything above the display, so nothing could have knocked it off. I don't have an explanation for it. It was right as I was about to close to. He was a rude ghost. I dreamed it was dark, raining, and I was in the woods walking towards a campfire. There were 3 men around it whom I had never seen before. One was wearing a shirt and pants with huge white and black horizontal stripes on it, such as a prisoner might wear. I could not figure out why I was not scared in my dream. Fast forward 10 months later. We're hunting and camping. A friend brings along 3 of his friends that we had never met before. I have to go to the bathroom, buried a 50-gallon drum and put a seat on it, and my husband walks with me since it's dark. We start back and it starts to rain. We get to the clearing and there are his 3 friends around the fire, one wearing the outfit described above. I wasn't afraid in my dream because my husband was behind me and I just couldn't see him. No one believes me. Talking with my son when he was 3 or 4 years old while he was playing with a Darth Vader toy in his mom's lap. Talking about the Wiggles or Barney or whatever. Completely unprompted. He said nonchalantly, "Dingo cold. Dingo cold," and goes back to playing with his Star Wars toys. I asked him what he said and he denied saying anything with a giggle. My wife very clearly heard him say dingo cold too. I never told him about my childhood best friend, Dingo, being killed in an avalanche 10 years earlier. When I was 19, I worked 3rd shift and was a little paranoid. I would take different routes to and from work, just in case. One night, as I was driving to work, I saw what was the stereotypical death, black hood, no face, scythe. It was just standing in a field, leaning on the scythe and watched me go by. I freaked. Once I got to work, I called my best friend and told him. That way, if I died, someone would know. Work went fine that night. I forgot it after a few nights. A week or so later, it was the same route on rotation, but to go home. Instead of going to work, I was involved in a head-on collision that temporarily killed me. I woke up a week later with extra parts and a lot of damage. My best friend asked me what route I had taken home and I lost it because it was the route I had seen death on before. I've related this before but I'll repeat it again. I can think of a few things that happened in my first year of college. I used to live in an apartment kind of place on campus with 3 other people. We all had our separate bedrooms, but shared a living space. It was on the 7th floor. To give a better idea, once, I woke up at around 2 AM to find that my phone was automatically playing a song. I closed the app, but it happened 2-3 times again. I would have put this down to my phone being weird, but then one of my roommates told me the exact same thing happened to her as well. This wasn't all. A few days later, I woke up to a beeping sound coming from my phone and when I checked, it was apparently a sound recording. The duration showed as 0.00, which meant that it shouldn't technically play at all. I deleted it immediately. Another time, my roommate and I were watching a movie and had stayed up till 3. It ended and she went to sleep. After a few minutes, she burst into my room and asked me what I was doing. I was confused because I was just lying in bed, reading. She said that she heard very weird noises from the window, which she assumed I was making to scare her or something. I went to her room and it sounded like heavy breathing, sighing. I told her it is just the wind. We opened the window and saw that the trees etc were completely still. I don't have the same phone, room or roommates anymore, even though I still stay on campus. There were 2. The first one was a UFO. I saw a light streak across the sky, make a 90-degree turn and streak away until it vanished. Years later I learned that it was probably just an asteroid breaking up. Put that one to rest. Once, When I was about 8, we were driving along a road in the backcountry, and I was staring out the window, and in the distance in a field I saw a silvery green glowing cloud that was completely unnatural. It suddenly moved, almost ran, towards the road, then up a tree just as we were passing it. As we climbed a hill, I saw it drop from the tree onto the road and float back into the fields. I was playing with our dog in the living room. At the time I was around 9 years old. We were doing our usual only play like this when mom isn't home else she'll tell us to stop type of playing. So basically playing fetch in the living room. At one point I threw the toy which caused it to ricochet out of the living room into the kitchen. Franz, our dog's name, chased it and disappeared around the corner to get it. At that exact moment the front door opened and mom walked in with Franz on a leash after a 2-hour walk over the beach and dunes. I tried to explain, but can't. I played with him for at least 15 minutes in. Apparently, my imagination. But I just don't believe that. I'm the type of person who keeps my bedroom door closed and locked all the time. No matter what, even if I'm home alone. So like a year ago, it was 1 AM and I had decided to get a glass of water before going to bed. After coming back in my room I swore that I closed and locked my door. After about 30 minutes of me dozing in and out of sleep, I suddenly felt all the ambient noise completely dissipate and immediately got that something feels off feeling. I got up and saw that my door was wide open. It scared the shit out of me as I was home alone. I've just chalked it up to being a one-time mishap on my part. I always remember this and do not have an explanation for it. When I was about 4 or 5 years old I remember waking up in the middle of the night and walking to the stairs. I remember closing my eyes for a second at the top of the stairs, and when I opened them I would be at the bottom of the stairs. I would run upstairs and close my eyes and the same thing would happen again. It happened at least 4-5 times until my parents called me to go to bed because they could hear me run up the steps. It's weird because I was wide awake and do not have a history with sleepwalking. I still think about it and wonder how that was possible. I work in hospice. Spend a lot of time around dying people. About a month and a half ago one of my longer term clients was actively passing. That can involve hallucinating, seeing and talking to people who aren't there. Happens a lot. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the dying person's brain trying to grasp with their new reality. So I work overnights. My client was wide awake, talking to people who were in the room with her but who weren't in the room with me, which was fine. I'm okay with that, until she started describing people I knew who had passed. I almost quit my job that night and told myself I wouldn't return to her. Most of the rest of her hospice care team started quitting in the next few days and I ended up staying with her until the end. That one weird night was the only time she was talking to my dead family members. I'm still kind of ducked up over it. My cat hated me for the first 7 years we had him. He was a feral that was tamed by my wife and only accepted affection from her. My wife assured me that this was common for ferals. Then one day he suddenly warmed up to me and wanted me to pet him. We've been best friends ever since. This was approximately 4 years ago, about the time that my wife's brain cancer was becoming aggressive. Even before we were aware of it. She died 2 years ago. It's like he knew it was just going to be the two of us one day. I'm not really a supernatural person at all. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. I can't explain anything creepy that happens when I'm alone usually, or anything that just generally creepy happens. But as you could have guessed from that lead up and this question, there is one thing I still don't have an explanation for that I still think about. This happened around 5 years ago now. When I was still in high school, my sister and I were both walking up, and to get to the school we have to walk down a small dirt path that runs right next to a cemetery. Usually it's only us two using the path at that time in the morning. Sometimes you'll see someone walking a dog but not often. We were walking down the path one morning when my sister said she thought she could hear someone following us. We checked behind us and no one was there. But if I listened I could hear the clicking of high heels behind us as we walked. The sound followed us all the way off the path and stopped when we reached the main road and there were loads of people. We then heard it again when it was just us two alone walking in a back alley to get us to my sister's then BF's house. Neither of us heard it for the rest of the day after we joined up with her BF. But for the rest of the time at school we both avoided using that path. We checked our bags to see if there was anything there that could make that sort of sound. But we both just had books in there. This isn't that creepy, all truth be told, but it's definitely had me thinking about things since it happened. Most of the time it's just easier to ignore it for my own sanity though. Edit. Accidentally put day instead of BF. Sleep paralysis. A few years ago, I was dreaming I was talking to a friend of mine. So far, nothing weird. But then, for some reason, I realized that I was in a dream and the person I was talking with technically wasn't my friend. Suddenly, their appearance turned to black and I felt them pushing me down and holding me down in my bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. At this point my cat woke up and jumped on me as if to protect me. Then, the dark silhouette or whatever that thing was vanished and I woke up. I swear I had red marks my shoulders where that thing was holding me down in my dream. In 1984, I was 14, was on a ferry heading to London. I was talking to some guys from India. They said they were going to kill Indira Gandhi. Few months later she was assassinated. I think about that from time to time. Premonitive dreams, mostly as a child, growing fewer and further between, until they stopped in my early 20s. The last I had was dreaming about the death of someone I cared very dearly about. A day later they drowned. That one affected me so badly that I think something simply switched off in my brain, and I no longer have premonitive dreams. I do, however, trust my intuition a lot in various circumstances.